Good morning. So today we study another topic within the paleontology subject, or it is also studied in biology also, that is biodiversity. Now, the term biodiversity was first proposed or coined by the scientist Walter G. Rosen in 1860. The word biodiversity, if we look at this word carefully, it consists of two different words, that means life, and the second part is diversity, that means varieties. So if you club these two terms into one term or into a sentence, the word biodiversity means it is the variety of life forms in our surroundings or in the ecosystem or in the entire earth. So depending on our scale of observation or depending on the resolution, how much area you are concerning, this biodiversity is applied to that. So sometimes we are observing only for an area, sometimes we are concerned the varieties of life forms of an ecosystem, and sometimes we are concerned about the varieties of lives of the entire earth. Now, in nature, three types of biodiversity are found to occur. The first one, that is your mangrove ecosystem. So these kinds of ecological condition, that means ecosystem means different ecological conditions, they have their particular setup of ecological conditions, and depending on that particular ecological setup, different organisms living in those conditions. So in this ecosystem diversity, we are concerning about the different types of ecosystems present in a region or present in the studied area. Now, if you look at the distribution of biodiversity of the main five kingdoms found in our nature, the main five kingdoms are Monera, Protista, Fungi, Plantae, and Anomalia. We all know that. Uh, Now, these five kingdoms are distributed throughout all the ecosystem of the nature. And if you look at the varieties of these five kingdoms, that means the number of species within these five kingdoms, we can easily see, or we can clearly see that the Animalia group, that means the animals, they have the most varieties among all these five kingdoms, and the Monera group, they have the least varieties. So in terms of varieties, animals are the highest, next is Plantae, and gradually the variety is decreasing to Monera. So Monera is the least variety group found in nature. Now in the world, if you look at the variety of lives and their distributions throughout the entire world, we found that there are certain locations in the entire world in which the variety of life forms at its peak. That means there are some locations where we get extreme variety of life forms, huge variety of life forms compared to other parts of the world. And these areas, these spots, these regions are known as biodiversity hotspots. And if you look at a broad pattern about the occurrence of these biodiversity hotspots, you see that most of these hotspot areas are situated near the tropical regions. India, that is also occur in the tropical subtropical regions of northern hemisphere. India also hosts two biodiversity hotspots. One is the Western Ghat, another is the Eastern Himalayan regions. So compared to all other parts of India, all other states of India, all other regions of India, the portions of Indian landmass which occurs in these two regions, that is the northeastern Himalayan and western Ghats, here scientists or people found maximum varieties of life forms. That is why these two places are known as biodiversity hotspots of India, and they are shown as red colored portions, and you can see different red colored portion in different areas of the world. Now, out of the 18 hotspots recognized in all over the world, so these 18 places or 18 regions are the most diversified areas, or these 18 regions having the maximum number of varieties of life forms found in the entire world. And among these 18 hotspot areas, India has two biodiversity hotspots, as I already told you. The first one is the northeast Himalayan portion and the western Ghats. If you see the distribution of biodiversity, the northeast Himalayan portion hosts about 1800 endemic species of plants. That means these plant species are only and only found in this region. In no other place of the world these plant species are recorded or found. Similarly, in Western Ghats, they host 1200 endemic plants. That is, these 1200 plants are only restricted to that particular area, to that particular ecological condition, that is Western Ghat. So you can get an idea how much rich these two areas in varieties of life forms. The other biodiversity hotspot areas are also there, but they are not as much high in biodiversity like the northeast Himalayas and the western Ghats. But there are other portions also, like the Sundarbans, like the Chilka Lakes in Odisha, and the Thor Desert area in part of Rajasthan and Gujarat. So apart from northeast Himalaya and western Ghats, these three areas, they are also having high biodiversity zones, but they are not considered as the biodiversity hotspots. Now, if you look at more closely, as I already told you, India is one of the 12 mega diversity countries of the world. It hosts about 7% of the global fauna. Look at the numbers of species, 47,000 plant species, and almost 7% of global fauna, that is 81,000 animal species. So India hosts a huge varieties of different types of plants and animals, and among them many are mainly restricted to Indian subcontinent. Now, why we are focusing on this endemicity, that means why we are uh, more emphasizing about the endemic varieties of life forms, that I come into some later slides. If you look at the endemism among the Indian species, about 62% of amphibians and 50% of lizards are solely found in India. That means they are completely restricted to the Indian landmass. If you look at the rankings of India in different species diversity of different groups of animals, you can see that among mammals, India's world ranking is 8th, and there is number of species is about 350. Among birds, 8th, number of species is 1200. Reptiles, 5th, number of species is 453. So like this. So you can see that in most cases, the position of Indian landmass is within the top 10 or top 20 countries having the most number of varieties of different kinds of lives, either different kinds of birds or different kinds of mammals or different kinds of amphibia, even the flowering plants. They have nearly 5,000 species in India. So you can get an idea about the vastness, about the huge variety of life forms found in India. Although the aerial span of India is not much higher compared to many other countries of the world. So till now we are we observe in the recent days, in the present day, recent time. Now if we look at the varieties of life forms, that is, if we look at the diversity of life forms through the entire geologic time, that is through the entire 4.6 billion years time, we can see you can see in this left graph that in the x-axis the geological times in terms of eons are plotted, all the times previous to Phanerozoic, that is clubbed under Precambrian, and the eon Phanerozoic is plotted. And we all know that within the 4.6 billion years, almost 4 billion years or far much larger time is covered by this Precambrian. The Phanerozoic time is only about 540 million years, half billion years only. So if you look at the varieties of life forms throughout this entire time span, we know that life appeared about 3.6 to 3.7 billion years ago at this time. So just after about 1 billion year after the formation of the earth. Now after the formation or after the appearance of life goes through several changes and comes to the present form where we are now. Now during this entire journey there are many ups and downs, and if you look at the varieties through time, you can see that the varieties are more or less very low or insignificant during the entire Precambrian time. And starting from the Phanerozoic, the varieties of life forms, the biodiversity of different life forms, they starts increasing. And as we move to the Paleozoic to Mesozoic to Cenozoic, we get more and more number of life forms found in the entire earth scenario. Now among the different incidents happened throughout this entire journey of life forms, scientists propose that there are certain major things which have to be notified during this journey, such as the first one is the origin of life, when life first appears. These are the major steps life take to come from its initial simple life forms to the present day form. So first step is the origin of life from the inorganic world. Second, eukaryotic origin, that means appearance of proper nucleated shell. Likewise, the fifth one is appearance of predation, that means hunting was started during that time, right from the base of the Cambrian. Hard part organism appears. Sixth part is biological reef bearing organisms. Seventh, when life starts moving to land. We all know that life appeared in aquatic condition or in marine condition under the water. So during this time, during the Silurian, Ordovician Silurian time, life moves from water to land. So a major change happened, and this was thought one of the major biological incident life has taken. For that, they are now moving to a different atmospheric or different environmental condition, and for that in this non-aquatic condition, that means previously life occurred still underwater and now it is uh, above the water surface, that means open to the atmospheric condition, open to a more dry condition. So life must undergo some sort of modifications to cope up with this new changing condition, that is known as terrestrialization of life. So that is a major step in the journey of life forms. Next is the appearance of trees and forest, and next is the appearance of flights in organisms, that means the birds appeared almost during this time. And lastly, the consciousness, that is the sense that happened during this time interval. So these 10 are the major steps life take from its entire journey path, starting from its origin about 3.6 to 3.7 billion years ago to the present day. Okay, now the life changes or varieties of life or varieties of characters appeared throughout the entire 4.6 billion years, as we observed from the previous picture. Now the question comes, why we are concerning about biodiversity? Yes, there is different varieties of life forms found in our surroundings and it occurs throughout the time. Yes, it is there, but why we are more concerned, why we study biodiversity in our biology or even in the paleontology classes? The thing is, if you look at this figure 9, 36% of species are considered to be threatened or extinct. That means these 36% species, that means among the entire varieties of life forms found in nature today, about one third or more than one third portion of the all the life forms present today, they are either completely extinct, completely removed, completely wiped out from the earth history, or they are in the threatened stage, that means they are soon going to completely wipe out. And I'm not telling you that percentage about the entire earth 4.6 billion years time, no, this percentage is concerning only for the present day. So if in present day there are 100 species are there, then within these 100 species 36 species are either extinct or soon to be extinct, that is they are completely threatened, that is they are verge of their death, that means verge of their death from the earth history. And we know that once a species got extinct from the earth history, it never came back. The famous example is dinosaur. In Mesozoic times, dinosaurs ruled out the earth. They were the kings of the earth, particularly in the land areas. But at KT boundary, at Cretaceous Tertiary boundary, when dinosaurs got extinct from the earth, they never came back. So that is why we are more concerned about biodiversity. Now, what are the threats of biodiversity? The threats may be divided into two parts. One is the natural causes, such as the narrow geographical area. That means if a species is restricted through a narrow territory, through a narrow area, then after some time, the resources taken by that species will be limited or will end soon. So the species, as it is restricted to a narrow area, it cannot acquire more and more resources. So after some time it may suffer starvation. Also, the variation of different gene interaction will also not occur. That means if a gene pool, if certain types of gene is restricted only to a particular place, then with reproduction process only those genes are carried in out or carried in the next generation. So no new varieties came, such that whenever the condition is changing, as the gene pool is restricted, the species is not able to cope up with that changing environment. So that is the problem of narrow geographical area. Second is the low population. Again, if a species have higher and higher population, higher and higher numbers, more and more numbers, then there must be more varieties of gene pools that can be circulated by reproduction in generation after generation. But whenever the numbers of an species are become less, that means the varieties of genes are decreasing, are lower in number. So again, with changing environment, the organism may not be able to cope up. Third, the low breeding rate, the fertility rate or reproduction rate, if it is becomes very low, then if some condition appears that before reproduction the parental stock, the parental organisms died, then the next generation will not come. But if the fertility rate is very high, then very quickly the parental stock reproduce next generation. And even if the number of next offspring is much higher, suppose an organism reproduce one individual and an organism reproduce 1,000 individual in every reproduction season or in every reproduction time. So two organisms, one is reproducing one individual, another reproducing 1,000 individual. Now if by some way this juvenile organism is killed off by some way, so the entire representative part of this species will lost from the history because of this low breeding rate, because of the low rate of producing next offspring. But if that this organism reproduce 1,000 individual in every intercourse time, then among these 1,000, if say however 500 individuals are died due to some reason, then apart from this 500, other 500 may survive, and they will carry the genes, they will carry the characters of that particular species. So although the mortality rate, the death rate is very high here, but as the reproduction rate, that is producing the juvenile offsprings, is very high, so that will not affect the organism much more, because the genes are circulated, the genes are carried to the next generation through these remaining, through the survival individuals. But if number of producing offspring is low, then with the death of these low number of offsprings, the organism will totally lost from the history. And the fourth one is natural disaster. So in nature we found that there are lots of disaster happens, lots of tsunamis, cyclone, tornadoes, and during these natural disasters many life forms or many lives, they suffer death, so that we did not have any control. So if you look at these four causes, these have no control for an organism. That means an organism cannot control these areas. Somewhere, somehow they are forced or restricted to uh, have these situations. And if the environmental conditions change, if they suffered um, more disturbed condition, the organisms may suffer extinction. The next part, which is of certain species, that part is known as man-made causes. So previously it was natural causes, that means all the natural things in which any species of the world is not responsible. It happens simply in natural cycle, in natural processes. Here in the second part, a single biological entity, a single biological species of all the living beings in the world, that is responsible for threatening or extinction for other species. So in this case, humans are responsible for extinction of others. How? The first one is habitat modification. So we all know that the population size or the number of human beings are increasing in a exponential way day after day. So to accommodate this increasing number of human population, we are encroaching newer and newer habitats. So sometimes we are cutting the forests, sometimes we cover all the wetlands and make large buildings, modern civilized societies. But to accommodate only the human population, we are destroying one natural ecosystem. We are destroying a wetland, sometimes we are destroying the forests, and thereby destroying that particular habitat or that particular ecosystem. So simultaneously with destroying that particular ecosystem, we are also forcing the animals or the organisms living in those ecosystem to extinction. Second is over exploitation of selective species. Sometimes we use certain species in a very high rate. Uh, in your daily life, you may see a famous example, that is the example of hilsa fish. In our childhood days, we see the size of one individual hilsa fish of about 1 kg to 2 kgs. But in present day, you see an adult hilsa fish of even of 500 grams. That means you see the eggs within the 500-gram size hilsa illis. But in our childhood days, we found the eggs within the hilsa fish in the size range of above 1 kg, mostly above 1.5 kg to 2 kg sizes hilsa fishes. We found the eggs. So what basically occurs is due to over exploitation. We unnecessarily over hunting, over catching the hilsa fish to fulfill our uh, taste, and due to that, sometimes we catch the hilsa fishes before spreading their eggs in the river bottoms. Before their reproduction time, we catch them. So what hilsa fish do? They onset their maturity. They onset their adult stage. So that is why nowadays the eggs within the hilsa fish are found even within the 500 grams. And if this continues persist, if this condition is going on, then after few years or after few decades, there will be no hilsa fish. So already hilsa fish is under threatened condition, that is due to over exploitation, that means over catching, over use by the humans. Third is the environmental pollution. We all know that starting from the industrial civilization, in many ways we remove or we put many toxic elements within the nature. Now those toxic elements may be very harmful for a particular habitat, for a particular ecosystem, and for a particular species. So whenever those pollutants are removed from the industries or from the households and mix with another environment, mix with the nature, they may cause severe damage to different species as well as the environment also. So this way, by increasing environment pollution more and more way, we are threatening, we are harm different species regularly. Hunting, sometimes we hunt just for fun, that is for no reason. After killing an organism, we did not use that organism in any purpose. So just for fun, just for our enjoyment, just to fulfill some rituals, we kill an organism and it is of no use further. And lastly, global warming and the cause of climate change. So we are not only degrading the environment or the habitat locally by increasing our environmental pollution, by increasing the industrialization day after day, and certain behaviors of the human beings, we are adding more and more greenhouse gases to the nature, and thereby the global temperature of the world is increasing. And for that, you may even hear in almost every nowadays that the ice mass, that the glaciers of these areas, that the glacier of Himalayas, glaciers of Greenland, glaciers of Antarctica are become smaller and smaller. That is, they are melting more and more due to this global warming effect. So these are the causes made by the sole biological entity, that is humans, that is not natural. So if by some way in the entire earth there are no humans, then automatically these reasons will not be there in the earth. Now, the current high rate of species mortality is due to the activity of a single species, Homo sapiens. So we, the humans, are responsible for the current rate of high mortality of other species, and that is for our different habits, that mainly for enjoyments or other criteria for our daily life. To fulfill them, we become threat to the other biological species of the world. And humans are changing conditions on earth so faster that new traits can evolve to cope with new conditions. And with change, it is the natural process that with changing conditions of environment, every organism try to cope up with that changing condition. But the danger is, the present scenario is imposed by the humans is such that we humans such a faster way that other organisms are not able to cope up with this changing environmental condition in so fast rate. That is why we become threat to other organisms. And if you look at the humans in one hand and other organisms, all other living beings in other hand, the main difference of human and other organisms is all other organisms are tool users. That means whatever tool they found in the nature, that they use for their uh, life sustaining processes. But humans, they are tool modifiers. That means whatever things we found in our surroundings, we collect them and modify them. We are so much intelligent that we can modify those tools depending on our necessity, depending to fulfill our criteria for sustaining day-to-day life. And during this modification process, we becomes almost blind, so that we sometimes harm, we sometimes affect the other species of the nature. Diversity lost due to single species, that is Homo sapiens, due to over exploitation, as I already told you. More and more species of an area are exploited, having greater amount of profits, having greater amount of sustaining the different purposes, and thereby we are not giving them to fulfill their natural reproduction cycles or other biological processes. So ultimately we are imposing some change through the biological uh, imposing some change to the biological processes of those organisms, and thereby they are highly affected. If a habitat is destroyed or disrupted, the native species, that means those species who are living at that environment, at that habitat, they might have to relocate or they will die. Sometimes they are not able to found a suitable place where they can sustain. So simply they will die due to our habitat exploitation. The separation of an ecosystem into small pieces of land is called habitat fragmentation. So by this way, we are creating an area having a narrow geographical range. So we divide the entire geographical area into small islands and thereby restricted the distributions of different organisms to the smaller island areas. By that way, we are imposing some narrow geographical area restriction to other organisms. Pollutions and atmospheric changes threaten biodiversity and global stability. As I already told you, the increasing numbers of atmospheric as well as other toxic elements to the nature, we added more and more toxic elements to the nature with more and more civilized society, more and more industrialization, and thereby we are affecting or we are destroying the natural condition in which other organisms are able to survive. If you look at some values, some percentages, you can see some 75% of the genetic diversity of crop plants have been lost in the past century. So that is due to the more and more industrial waste removal to the lands of harvesting. So 75% of genetic diversity crops was lost just in the past 100 years. Some scientists estimate that as many as 3 species per hour are going extinct in the modern days, and there is about 20,000 extinction occur in each year. Roughly one third of the world's coral reefs have been destroyed or highly degraded, that means highly damaged. They are soon going to be extinct. About 24% of mammals and 12% of bird species are currently considered to be globally threatened. More than 50% of the world's wetlands, that is an ecosystem, have been drained out by the intelligent human beings, and simultaneously the populations living in those wetlands, they have declined by 50% only in 20 years time. So you can get an idea about the vastness of human civilized behavior, human, or you can say it's the cruelty of one biological species, and the effect of those cruelty is clearly observed within decades or within the 100 years in the other biological species of the world. Diversity lost due to a single species, Homo sapiens. This is an famous chicken found in the American landmass. This is known as common name is heath hen. Now, this is a very famous uh, chicken found in America. These chickens are almost forgot to fly. So when peoples encroach American landmass from different other parts of the world, they randomly kill these chickens and taken them as food. So in the early 19th century, there are lots of heath hens. But whenever people encroaching the landmass of America and start killing rampantly these heath hens, soon in 1840 they reduced their numbers, and they are found only few places within the entire American landmass. At the end of uh, 19th century, the numbers becomes almost 200 individuals, and during the 1916 or the time around that the last individual of heathane was reported from the world. After that, there was no heathane in the world is recorded. So you can see that with more and more hunting of heathens within a span of 100 to 120 years, this species was completely lost from the earth scenario, and that is due to the behavior of Homo sapiens. This is another bird extinct within 61 from the earth scenario. So Dutch people noticed this bird in Mauritius Islands in 1598, and their story ends at 1681. So it takes only about 80 years. Likewise, there are many organisms such that this is the Himalayan vulture, that is the Indian bird. These are also threatened, and they are so reduced in number that soon they are going to be extinct. This is the passenger pigeon, again another threatened bird. So these are not extinct, but they are in the verge of extinction. Spoonbill sandpiper, again another endangered biological species. They are very reduced in their numbers and soon going to be extinct. The Siberian crane, Bengal florican, Himalayan wolf, the moa. You can see this, although this is a cartoon, this human being is hunting or killing this moa bird from its back. So, like this way, we killed many organisms. This one is shocking picture. This is the dolphins in the Denmark oceans. You can see the dead bodies of dolphins, lots of dolphins with the human beings, and look at the color of the seawater that becomes red. The seawater becomes red with the blood of these dolphins. Now, this death of dolphins is not a natural thing. These are done by human beings, and the killing of dolphin is just to fulfill a single ritual by the Denmark peoples. The ritual is whenever the Denmark people are stepping into their adult stage, just to show that they becomes adult or their adulthood, they go to the nearby oceans and rampantly kill the dolphins just to show others that they becomes adult. So just to fulfill that ritual criteria, just to make fun to their adulthood, they kill these dolphins in the sea, and after their death they are not used at all. So now we feel proud of, we may feel proud that how intelligent we are. This picture actually does not uh, show about the generousness of the Homo sapiens. Instead, it show our cruelty. In the Indian coast, you often found these kinds of pictures that people collecting, the poor people's collecting lots of sales of these bivalves and gastropods, that is marine mollusks. They are distributed all along the marine beaches. Here you can see one woman collecting the shells of mollusks distributed in this beach. They collect them and gather them to an area, and they use these shells for poultry feeding. They churn them and make small fragmentary species, uh, which becomes a raw ingredient for calcium supply to the chickens, to the poultry uh, organisms, to the poultry farms. So by this way, whenever, although they are dead cell, but by collecting these dead cells, we are forcing a modification to this natural setup, and maybe we are forcing some changes, forcing some hard situations to other organisms also, to fulfill our necessity, to fulfill our enjoyment, to fulfill the poultry chickens which we use them for our enjoyment later. So thereby we are destroying one natural habitat. That is a simple use. We are not killing those organisms, but we are collecting their dead cells and thereby modify the natural ecological condition of that area. And famous study was done in the coastal areas of Odisha by the researchers of Jadavpur University, Kolkata, on this bivalve species, Meretrix, and they found within the span of 10 to 20 years, due to this increased use of the species. So nowadays the demand of poultry peoples to supply those cells for the calcium supply to the poultry chickens is so huge that, along with the dead cells which are distributed in all the parts of the beaches of the Odisha coast, peoples also collect the living shells, the living molluscan bodies, the living bivalves. So along with the dead shells, people also collect the live living bivalve shells. So thereby we are destroying them, we are forcing some kind of artificial force for their death, and this practice becomes so hard, so huge, that within a span of 10 to 20 years, it was observed by these researchers that the adult size of this bivalve species becomes drastically reduced. So again, the adult maturity stage of the organism of the bivalve meretrix is onset, like the hilsa fish. So not only the hilsa fish, the lower group of organisms which we may not notice in our daily life, well, their overuse, their over exploitation also affect them to changing their biological process. Another, this famous plants is known as Saraka asaka. We all know the story of Sita and the Ashok forest in our epic Ramayana, and from that name, the plant species is named as Saraka asaka, which is found in the southern part of Indian landmass and in the western Ghats. And this plant is a medicinal plant, so many medicines are um, formed or produced from these plants. Now, in a recent study in the 2014, these people, Patwardhan and his co-workers, they found that these medicinal plants found in the Western Ghats, they becomes endangered simply due to habitat destruction, due to the modifications for human settlements. So again, due to the cope up, due to uh, balance the over uh, increasing human population, we are encroaching to those habitats situations, to those environments, and by which we destroy them, we modify them, and thereby we becomes the cause for destroying, along with those habitat situations, many other organisms death also. If you look at the entire biodiversity of India and the threatened species within India, you can see that among mammals, within the 386 species, 41% are nowadays threatened. Among birds, 7%. Among reptiles, 46% are endangered. That among amphibians, that is 57%. And look at the endangered number for fish, that is 70%. So these percentages of species of these different groups of animals, they are suffering threats and soon going to extinct due to the activities of Homo sapiens. So what is the future of biodiversity? One famous quote by Julius Caesar is that men at sometimes are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. So we are digging our own graveyard, and we are responsible, not the stars or other natural things, for our future. It is we who are writing our future in our own hand by modifying, by destroying the environments day by day and the living beings also. So why is biodiversity important? Why we are more concerned about this biodiversity? Now, this biodiversity, they provides many resources along with food, medicines, and many raw ingredients for our daily life. So biodiversity, they used as resource, natural resource to sustain the human population. Now, with increasing use of this resource, the most affected part is the biodiversity. So in one day, this connection between the human population and the resource utilization, this middle portion, the bridge was broken, because as there was no varieties of lives, the biodiversity was lost from the nature. Simply there is shortage of resource. And there are lots of scientific studies on them, such as this paper. This paper is published in a famous renowned journal, telling that forecasting global biodiversity threats associated with human population growth. So as more and more human population increasing day by day, we are increasing more resource. The demand for resource increase day by day, but to sustain or to fulfill that resource, we are basically destroying the biodiversity, and sometimes after we did not get those resources. Organisms are independent. A loss of species will affect other species also, because we know that in nature all organisms are connected through a chain, that is the food chain or food pyramid. That means energy is supplied from the lower level organisms, from the producers to the first order consumer to second order to tertiary consumers. So all the organisms in nature, they are connected through a chain. Now if by some way the producer group or any other group within this chain, suppose they are completely going extinct, then without this particular group of organisms, the entire chain, the entire pyramid will simply collapse. So we are like the Kalidas, that is, we are sitting on a branch of tree and we are cutting the same branch. We don't know that when the cutting of that branch is complete, then along with the branch, we also fall on the surface. So with increasing use of biodiversity, with increasing hampering, with increasing affecting the biodiversity, biotic bodies of the world, we are basically digging these chains, we are basically cutting these chains, and after some day this entire chain will collapse, and along with other organisms we also feel the same fate, that is, we also going to be extinct. And this time this fate of human beings are not natural, but it is written by the human beings themselves. So to after knowing this situation, we are trying to conserve the biodiversity, and for that we take several measures, such as use of renewable resources instead of non-renewable ones. We use those energy sources which we can renew day by day, and thereby the environmental pollution becomes low. Sustainable use means using resources at a rate in which they can be replaced. So when over exploitation is stopped, we are using the resources in a rate so that they can be replaced, they can be recycled, they can be again fulfilled. We made some protected areas where the activities of human beings are restricted and the natural conditions are stored, remain intact in those areas. Those are the national parks, reserve forest. Improve the survival of the biodiversity by providing corridors or passageways between different habitats, between different island populations, so that the exchange of gene pool can happen, so that the organisms did not force to uh, live in a narrow geographical area, so that the geographical area can be enlarged, and that there was continuous mixing or continuous supply of gene pool between the organisms of different areas. Bioremediation, the use of living organisms such as prokaryotes, fungi, plants to detoxify the polluted areas. And since 1970s, many more laws are imposed, and they acted in a strong way by the peoples, and we and our future generations must be very much take care to fulfill all those criterias to for sustaining of biodiversity and ultimately for sustaining of ourselves. So in conclusion, it can be said that biodiversity is our life. If the biodiversity got lost at this rate, at the present day rate, and you may came to know in your next classes that why the rate of biodiversity loss is in the present day is thought to be so high, because from your earlier slides, you came to know that it was estimated that at present day almost 3 species became extinct in 1 hour, or there is 20,000 extinction of species occur within a year. Now, all other previous extinctions of organisms happened throughout the entire 4.6 billion years time. Those are by natural causes, and scientists estimated the rate of extinction at those events is much lower in rate compared to the present day extinction of biological entities, simply due to the human activities. So that is why it was alarming to us. That is, the present rate of biological species extinction or biological species killing by the human beings is overwhelmed the rate of extinction of all other previous incident. So it is our moral duty to conserve biodiversity as well as our environment. For that, nowadays scientists from different parts of the world impose different days in which all the rules, all the regulations are discussed, and they are maintained by every country of the world, such as the International Day for Biological Diversity, World Environment Day, World Habitat Day. All these kinds of different activities are taken in those days, and also throughout the entire year. We try to conserve, we try to take care the living beings, the biodiversity surrounds us, and we try to affect those biological entities as less as we can, and that is done only for that, so that we can sustain in future. That means for uh, for our safe side, so that we did not go to extinction, we have to look after our surrounding living beings. Thank you.